Good morning, noon, and night, wherever and whenever you are listening. You are listening to The Shift. I am your host. My name is Doug McKenty. This is the 20th episode of The Shift. It's being recorded on December 7th, 2017. If you like what you're listening to, please check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/The Shift. If you want to find out more information, go to Facebook at The Shift with Doug McKenty. Join the conversation on Twitter at DMcKenty, or for more information about the show and all the show's archives, you can check out my website at www.theshiftnow.com. My guest on the program today is journalist Joachim Hagopian, who's working on a recent book, Pedophilia and Empire, Satan, Sodomy, and the Deep State, which is now providing the alternative research community with a much-needed resource linking the history of occulted secret societies with the modern-day actions of the elite cabal and intelligence agencies involved in a global network of pornography, pedophilia, and child trafficking. Graduating from West Point in the 1970s, Joachim went on to obtain a master's in clinical psychology after his military service. This led to a 27-year career as a clinical therapist where he often confronted the trauma in his clients caused by sexual abuse in childhood. Joachim currently works as a journalist whose articles can be found at such venues as LouRockwell.com, Global Research, and SOT.net. Applying his journalistic research skills to the problems of sexual abuse observed during his time as a clinical therapist produced Pedophilia and Empire, providing the global and historical context for a serious problem that has become epidemic and scarred the lives of millions of people worldwide. The book not only provides ample evidence of a massive underground pedophilia network connected to elite secret societies and intelligence agencies, but also exposes the convoluted Luciferian philosophy behind it all. Joachim Hagopian, thank you for being on the program, and thank you for helping to make the shift. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Doug. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming on the show. I mean, this whole topic of pedophilia is always out there. It's always been a part of this truth movement or this alternative research community, but it's something that I never really delved into too much. So it was great to find that you're working on putting together this research for everyone that really connects the dots between what's going on, the history, the lineage, the secret societies, the elite, the intelligence communities, the history of it all leading up to what's really going on today. And then, how it's really feeding into this pedophilia network that's going on worldwide. Just to start it off, do you want to give us a little bit of your history and why you decided to focus on this topic?
Sure. Well, my dad was a 20-year submariner. Fought in World War II, in the Korean War, and earned silver stars and all kinds of medals for his courage and valor. And he kind of indoctrinated me to follow in his footsteps. So I ended up at West Point during the height of the Vietnam War. And of course, that war was based on a lot of lies and a lot of corruption going on in Washington at the time. And I was always an individual. And the U.S. Military Academy trains robots. They brainwash the incoming cadets into becoming robots who just follow orders. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much the system, the military seniority system. They punch their ticket on the way to the top based on seniority, clicking their heels, ingratiating their superiors with kiss-ass remarks to end up basically being promoted through the ticket punching process. And that's why we have generals that are incompetent, corrupt, and don't win wars. Of course, that's also by globalist design that we're not winning wars since World War II.
Right.
If we can even call that a victory. So anyway, I did not fit in all that well as an individual with integrity. There's an honor code at the academies. A cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal. But those in power, in positions of authority as officers, supposedly role models for cadets, can lie through their teeth, cheat, and steal. And that's what they did to me. I became the first cadet ever to be kicked out for 5 too many demerits in a 6-month term, took them to the last day, but they managed to do it because all they have to do is well, I almost said a profanity, to make stuff up about you that you
Right.
didn't do. And that's what they did. It's called railroading cadets out of the academy. It had been a long time practice since 1802 at West Point. If they don't like you for whatever reason, they just run your demerits up on false charges and you have no say, no due process, and they kick you out. So to make a long story short, I took them to court at Federal New York City District Court, and I won for failure to allow due process of law, one of our sacred constitutional rights that unfortunately in modern times has been stripped away from us, along with all the rest of our constitutional freedoms and rights because of the, well, New World Order regime that wants to enslave us all while making war everywhere around the world, raping and pillaging all other nations to steal their natural resources. Well, you know, it's the same mentality as the Vietnam War and the lies that pretty much kept that war going for the longest war in American history at the time, a near decade. 7,000 Americans died. 3 million Asians, Southeast Asians died. The U.S. military has killed 30 million people since World War II. It's a war-making, killing machine. And unfortunately, it's not for the purpose of spreading democracy around the world, much the opposite. It's for spreading globalism and monopolism so that the big corporations can rape and pillage all the natural resources from the rest of the world. I value our military personnel. Most of them are good people, but they have to realize that they've been basically used as objects, cannon fodder for neocolonial wars. So anyway, I took them to court, I won, and I became the first cadet ever to successfully, legally beat the West Point system, and I managed to graduate. It was the end of my 3rd year. They were going to throw me in the Army as a private for the next 4 years for falsifying a bunch of demerits on me in a command conspiracy that came from the colonel, the head of the regiment. But I headed them off at the pass in New York and managed to get back in. So that was kind of my start. I'm an idealistic person that practices my ideals. And I still believe, as my generation once did, that we can change the world. And I arm myself with the truth. And that is the best way, I believe, to change the world. All we need to do is spread the truth about what the elite has been doing to us for centuries.
Right.
And we're going to become so outraged that we will demand change and accountability. And now that basically the tide is turning and people on this earth know probably more about what the elite has been doing in their conquering and dividing strategy to have us all pitted against each other and fighting each other so that they remain in power for all these years. That's exactly what they've been doing. And I hate to say it, but they've been pretty successful. I mean, there's a lot of talk about now it being so factionalized and so much conflict out there amongst the population that's so polarized that, you know, we're on the brink of civil war. So, yeah, we have to see who the real culprits in this world are. The baby killers, the baby rapists, they're the ones that are doing it to us. And they've been doing it for a long, long time. Well, their Achilles heel is pedophilia. They're sick, very demented, perverse people, if you want to even call them human. Some don't. Some believe they're like hybrids from, you know, Anunnaki and all this kind of stuff. So, but anyway, they have to be psychopaths. It's a private club, as George Carlin used to say, one of my favorite comedians of all time. It's a private club and you're not in it. And that's the truth. That's the truth. That's the truth. And so, yeah, from the get-go, pretty much, you know, was always fighting for truth and justice, and I ended up basically out in Los Angeles after the Army, and I earned the clinical degree in psychology and became a licensed therapist, a licensed marriage family therapist out there. And I worked with the largest child protective services department in the entire United States in Los Angeles County, Department of Children and Family Services. And if there ever is a broken system, that's one. I'll tell you that much. I continually clash with the system on behalf of my clients. I work mostly with youth and adolescents that were trapped in the child welfare system. They were in foster care homes. They were in group homes. They were in residential facilities, and they were also on probation. And so I had to go to court constantly on behalf of my clients to try and get the system to make decisions that were in the best interest of these poor children that have already been abused in their young life.
Right.
I worked many a times with pedophile victims, and the system only puts them in more grave danger of abuse. Something like 70% of kids in foster care are abused while in foster care. A whole bunch of them are murdered. And the foster care system, the child protective services system in this country, is a pipeline for child slavery and trafficking and sex abuse. They put them into the system. They enslave them. They make money off these kids. Now, I'm not saying every social worker, every child protective services in this country are evil. I met a lot of good people, So I'm not like blasting everybody that's part of that. There's a lot of good people there. However, there's some corrupt, very evil, satanic type people that are in charge in a lot of different places around the country and around the world. It's a world problem. There was a big bust in the child protective services system in India a couple of months ago. So it's going on everywhere where there are these corrupt, evil individuals that are actually throwing these kids away into the slavery pipeline, trafficked around the world, and then sodomized by the elite. So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, it seems like these, because the system is so hierarchical, like you were talking about at West Point, but really even across the board, our culture is so hierarchical that it's easy to compartmentalize a few of these. If these pedophiles find themselves into positions of power, and it seems from your work, it seems like a lot of pedophiles end up at the top of these pyramids, and that way they're able to then compartmentalize the information, find other people of like mind. They can get away with this stuff because they're in those top layers, and then they can cover it up if they ever get busted because they're part of the top layers. And because it's so compartmentalized, very few other people, like you say, the vast majority of good people who are in the military or working with child protective services, they're just not going to know. Or if they do know or suspect, if they speak up, they'll probably just lose their jobs, and the problem goes away.
Exactly right. You nailed it right on the head. And that's how come their system it's basically they plant all the evil ones in charge so that the foxes are guarding the hen house, and they're basically shielded from any accountability. And anytime there's a scandal, and I chronicle basically all the scandals from the 80s right to the present in this book.
And there are a lot of them.
There sure are, all over the world. Yeah. America has its share, and the UK has its share, and it's all over Europe and everywhere, Australia. And of course, we already know about how horrible the church has been with their history of pedophilia.
Right.
Yeah, that's really in particular.
Really well documented.
Yes. And so are like my chapter that I'm working on right now at the moment is the Franklin, scandal.
Right.
That took place in the 80s and early 90s, and the Boys Town kids, the Mickey Rooneys from the movie, were flown over to Washington, D.C. and had midnight tours of the White House while they were sodomized there by George H.W. Bush, a pedophile. And it's confirmed this man is the drug lord of the world and a pedophile. The crime family of the Bushes and the Clintons, they're all pedophiles, they're all Satanists, and they're all drug pushers, and they're all child traffickers. It's a fact. So we got to get rid of the crime cabal that's been in charge for like at least 4 decades, really since the JFK assassination. This shadow government that Kennedy himself basically spoke of before he died has been in control now for, over a half century. And,
Right.
and so that's why this whole pedophilia operation has just accelerated in recent years. It kind of submerged a little bit when the bust came in the 80s of these various scandals.
Mm-hmm.
So they submerged just under the surface. But since basically, quote, Pizzagate / Pedogate, because that's what it is. It isn't a pizza joint in Washington, D.C. that's the focus of everything going wrong. No, it's an endemic epidemic that's obviously very global. And we're talking basically pretty much every major leader in the world is complicit, is compromised, or is actually a pedophile engaging in satanic practice of butchering up and sodomizing children.
Mm-hmm.
They all fall into that category. Basically, it's like we were saying, it's the inner top layers of all the leaders, and it's law enforcement all around the world. It's the judicial system. All the court judges, high court judges, are all part of it. It's the child welfare system. It's the education system. The CIA is pretty much the pimp of this whole global operation. They're the ones that make the contacts. They work through front organizations, quote, charity organizations. They come in, they work with orphanages from around the world, and of course, covertly are funneling all the kids. Or they also work through the State Departments. The State Department is wicked in this, and it is as deep as the CIA. That's a cover, basically. And then I did a chapter where I featured a lot of the activity in Pacific Asia, Philippines, yep, Myanmar, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand. Ooh, it's real bad there.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah.
Had a lot of good information.
So they basically provide these children from these local orphanages for all the dignitaries and VIPs, senators, congressmen, high up their people, pedophiles, mm-hmm, and then they have their way with these poor kids. If they don't actually, put them on a plane or a ship and then put them somewhere else in the world to be further abused. So that's the system that we're up against here. I see it as the Achilles heel of the ruling elite that's been in charge of this earth for a long, long time.
Right.
And it's our best shot at getting rid of them, because nothing will anger and outrage an individual more than knowing what they're doing to these poor kids. And we're talking about huge numbers. Now, the number of missing kids, and this is a statistic of a few years ago, is 800,000 in the United States and up to like 8 million worldwide of missing children. That isn't to say that all of them are part of the slavery trafficking system, but a whole bunch of them, a good percentage of those 8 million kids are part of this child trafficking system, being constantly abused every day. The average lifespan of one of these kids placed into this sex slavery system is 2 years. And then they die. They're gone. And it's been going on for a long, long time. That's right. Why it's time to stop it. This year, next year, we're going to make some big indents in this whole criminal operation. And we've seen a lot of low-level busts and arrests, unprecedented, the number of arrests in the last year alone. Well, I'm waiting for the big ones, the senators, the congressmen, up to a third to a half of our government personnel are pedophiles or compromised. It's a blackmail system where basically all the leaders of the world are controlled through this blackmail system of compromising them through these activities of pedophilia. You know,
Right.
they may think they're going to bed with a woman at a party, and they wake up with a child in bed with them, and their camera's rolling. So, you know, that's the way it is. That's the system. It's run by a handful of people on this earth that pretty much own and control every transnational corporation, every government, and they're practicing Satanists. So part of their ritual is basically supplying a fresh supply of kids, and they're killing them every single day. They're raping and killing every single day. We must stop this criminal operation. So, okay.
Well, I know there's just so much information to go through. I mean, like you were talking about, a lot of people, like as I was reading the book, you know, it's hard to wrap your mind around the extent of this. But then, you know, I think it's helpful to bring it back to that notion that it really is just a handful of people that really are running this blackmail campaign. So, you know, you're a young representative at the U.S. House of Representatives, and you're invited to a party in Cambodia with a bunch of, you know, billionaires that are probably going to give something to your campaign. And like you say, you know, the next thing you know, you wake up with a 16-year-old and they've got you on tape. And that's how suddenly you're in their back pocket, because, you know, if you say anything about it, then you get exposed. And I mean, this goes, J. Edgar Hoover was well known for these tactics.
Right.
It's just a way of controlling our government. And so it's not like everybody's a pedophile, but it's like this group of pedophiles has learned how to rig the system in this way to blackmail, you know, the vast majority. And because they're at the top of the system, you know, it's just one other methodology of control, so that they can, like you say, they've got control of the corporate hierarchy. This is a way to maintain control through blackmail of the government hierarchy as well. It's pretty amazing when you see the extent of it, how big it is. Like you say, 8 million kids going missing every year. The scope of the problem is really huge, and I hope that we can start talking about it a lot more. The mainstream media barely even touches this. It's phenomenal. You know, the problem of racism, these other divide and conquer issues, feminism, racism, they'll turn these into huge issues, but pedophilia never gets talked about. Do you want to discuss that a little bit? I mean, what's going on with the mainstream media here?
Well, let's face it. The CIA pretty much controls mainstream media. Jeff Bezos is the operative in the CIA, Washington Post owner, and that's why he hired John, you know, the pedophile, basic Podesta, you know, columnist now, so he can defend himself, you know. Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. They're either pedophiles or complicit in this whole pedophile operation. And therefore, they do what they're told. They're paid big bucks to basically lie and talk about fake news. They are the providers and purveyors of all the fake news. Now, there's fringe elements on the internet, obviously, that are also fake news. But there's a core of very good news sites on the internet where you can basically get some semblance of truth, at least the closest available. And those are the ones that have been targeted. They're on lists of being fake news, and they're in fact the actual, you know, only source of true news.
Right. This fake news thing was I mean, it came out because Pizzagate started to come out on these truth websites. And so they had to counter with this fake news thing. And now they're using it to say, oh, it's all Russian propaganda. I mean, it's blown up like, oh my God, everybody that's alternative to corporate media is now fake news. But it all started with the pedophilia thing. I mean, that's important. I think that shows, you know, how big this pedophilia issue is to the crux of the whole conspiracy, if you will, the way these elites work.
Well, that's why we're seeing a lot of wag the dog activity, basically, with, I mean, it's a step in the right direction, because obviously women have been abused. I mean, that's a fact. So the Weinstein, the Kevin Spacey, who actually is a pedophile, you know, basically raped an underage boy, at least, and you know, he many probably. He's a frequent flyer on the Lolita Express, Jeffrey
Yeah.
Epstein's blackmail operation down there in the Caribbean and Florida and New Mexico. And we've got mansions everywhere in New York City. Hey, our President Trump ran with him. He said in New York Magazine, hey, he's a buddy of mine. Boy, he loves the beautiful women just like me. He really loves those young ones, doesn't he? That's his quote, So
It's amazing.
That was in 2002, three years before the bust of Jeffrey Epstein as a now convicted registered pedophile.
Right. Amazing.
So yeah, and now we have a Secretary of Labor who was the prosecutor that gave him the sweetheart deal, where Jeffrey Epstein would show up basically at night to sleep in a plush little jailhouse, and then go basically be free during the day. He did this for 13 months, and he's raped dozens and dozens of underage girls. I mean, we're talking 12, 13, 14-year-old girls, and he got away with it. So this is how they operate. They all protect each other. You have to be one of them to basically be part of it. And so, this is what we're up against. And I'm not convinced that Trump himself is not compromised. Now, I will say, under his watch, there have been more busts than ever before. So that's a positive. And he has, even before he became president, he's tweeted things like, we got to get rid of those pedophiles, death penalty. He has come out strong on that. So, I'll give him that credit. I just hope he's not compromised and is just all talk and then not enough action. Like when I start seeing the Clintons and the McCains, and some of those, at the top of the tree of pedophilia, when I start seeing them go down, then I'm going to be a believer that he's actually draining the swamp.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's hard to say with Trump because I don't know, and I tend to fear that he's compromised. They're all compromised by the time you get there. I'm not holding my breath to see, the system fix itself from within. I hope that people like you and being on this program and talking about it can finally just awaken the population up enough to get the job done, because I don't know if it can happen from the inside. It just seems like it's so dirty. I mean, like, it's funny. You just open your mouth, you start talking about Jeffrey Epstein, and then it's like, the documented facts of Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Kevin Spacey on the Lolita Express going to these island parties, Donald Trump. I mean, it's like, what? I mean, the names just start flying out and the instances it's just it's a lifestyle of debauchery that these people have cultivated. And they maintain it in secrecy as a part of being this power elite. Can we get into a little bit about the history of this? Because I really enjoyed the parts of your book that filled in, the history of the various secret societies. But I mean, how far back it goes all the way to the Babylonian Empire and Moloch and Baal and these, ancient gods. I mean, it's, funny. I was talking to a friend of mine about this, and it's like, we hear about how they used to sacrifice virgins, 5,000 years ago, but that hasn't stopped. They're still doing it. It's what they do. So, I mean, you can trace the lineage back. So will you explain some of that history for everyone? Because it really is amazing to see.
Yeah, I mean, this is nothing new, folks. I mean, we're talking many, many centuries. I mean, supposedly, of course, we know that basically the history of humankind is a lie. A lot of it is a lie. It goes much further back than what they say. And that was basically a calculated choice that they made to feed us the wrong information. But we're learning, science itself is basically teaching us that the humans go way, way back. And that there seems to be, I know I'm getting a little bit off the subject. I'll go back to, the Babylonians and the Baal and Moloch and all of these deities from Egypt and the Sumerians and the Israelites. I mean, they're the Ammonites. They're all part of it. They were all doing sacrifices of children, and it's not even just the Middle East or it's not just Europe. They were doing their share in Europe as well. but it's also in places like China, and I mean, they've had to and human sacrifices pretty much. And of course, we also know about the Incas and the Aztecs, and so it seems to be. Here's the way I kind of interpret a lot of this. There's a rise and fall of civilizations all throughout history. And the rise might be a time where it's progressive and they're doing things in the right way, and that's the reason why they've arisen to a powerful, group of people and culture. But then there's the downside, and it seems like it's almost universal with all of these historic cultures, where the downside, the people in charge become extremely corrupt. Mm-hmm. And then they start engaging in these, inhumane, debaucherous practices of child sacrifice, and also pedophilia becomes, rampant during these times. It seems to be almost universal that it's followed suit. And of course, let's face it, the United States peaked, I would say, back in the 80s, and as far as economic and power, but it's on the downswing. We know that. We have the neocons in Washington, dual citizens loyal to Israel, fighting Israel's wars in the Middle East for oil. But basically, and basically doing everything to be unipolar and not willing to allow Russia and China, as also very powerful nations on this earth, to share. We have neocons in charge that are basically willing to risk the death of every human being on this earth, just so they can go to the grave saying that America is number one in the power. And of course, we know that these are only puppets for these ruling bloodline families that have been in control. The whole history, yes, I'll go back to that again. Basically, the Knights of Templar, they're one of the early groups during the Crusades, that Christians on the way to the Holy Land of Jerusalem and Palestine. And they actually ended up, taking from the ancient mystical traditions from the Kabbalism, which predates Judaism, and basically they engaged in this practice of worshiping Baphomet, the head of the goat and the woman's breasts, and the devil, basically Satan. That's the symbol that it's come to represent. And they engaged in sodomy, and they engaged in pedophilia. They basically had this oath, of initiation, where they would have to do these things. And these traditions, these cultic ritual traditions, practices, have carried on all through the ages. I mean, all you need to do is look at the Skull and Bones at Yale University, where the Bushes and Carey and a whole bunch of others became members. And every Ivy League institution has their Skull and Bones, or they just have a different name. But they go through these rituals. I mean, Princeton, I covered a lot of Kay Griggs, the wife of Colonel George Griggs, Raymond George Griggs, and George Raymond Griggs, excuse me. And anyway, and he's a Princeton grad, and they go through this christening ceremony at the college, and they go through it, in his case, as a colonel in the Marine Corps, where he was trained as an assassin for the government, and where they actually engage in homosexual sodomy. They actually also engage in pedophilia. It's all part of the initiation process, where they can be controlled because they're compromised. That's what so much of it is based on. And of course, in the humiliation of being sodomized by a powerful male doing this to you, it's part of an intimate humiliation, secret ceremony that you then will keep to your death in secrecy. Except this Griggs's downfall is he was an alcoholic, and so when he would drink, which he did every day, loose lips sink ships, and he would confide in his wife for 10 years all the secrets of the evil things that he was engaged in. And this guy took his orders from the very top, basically the commander-in-chief, you know, he did like a 37-year career or something as a Marine officer. So he went from like I think like the 60s all the way to, because he was a 59 grad, 1959 of Princeton, and was a lieutenant. He went all the way up to the 1990s, late 90s. And I mean, Kissinger, you know, Brzezinski, all the presidents, he ran with them. And Kay did too, as his wife. And they're pedophiles, a lot of homosexuals. And it's all just part of the system. It's very corrupt and perverse. And they are Satan worshipers. A lot of them are that are at the top levels of all these different entities or institutions. So it's a long history. We have the same bloodlines that are in royalty. I mean, we have basically, Queen Beatrice of the Netherlands. We have Queen Elizabeth in England. And they go back, their bloodline, Merovingian bloodline, basically, it goes way back to basically all the way back to the Templar and even before then. And they've also infiltrated the Catholic Church. Many of them have been popes. And we know basically the Catholic Church has been taken over by basically pedophile Satanists. Malachi Martin, who was a Jesuit priest himself, had assignments in Rome, in the Vatican, and he got an inside glimpse and then wrote about it before he died. And it's basically infiltrated all the governments. It's so rampant. And so, it's time to, bring it out of the closet finally, face it in the light of day, in the truth seen through the light of day. And then it's time to do something about it and hold these bad people accountable.
Will you talk a little bit about the Sabatini Frankist lineage of Judaism? Because, I had read about that. A lot of, alternative researchers get blamed for being anti-Semitic because, they tend to talk about Jewish people or Judaism. But really, it's this particular lineage that kind of went astray a few hundred years back. I think they've been excommunicated officially from traditional Judaism, but they do hold sway in these elite circles.
Right. Yeah. Basically, in the 1500s and the 1600s and the 1700s, during that era came the Sabatini and the Frankish. And these are two individuals, very charismatic, basically Satan worshipers, that engaged in all kinds of perversions, of course, including pedophilia. And they were kind of like a renegade, runaway group, apart from Judaism or basically Orthodox Judaism. And it was a radical group of pleasure, hedonism, anything goes. And the rationale is, in order to bring, and they also both claimed they were the Messiah. So they say, in order for the Messiah to come and save us all, it will happen sooner if you engage in all these debauchery and perversions. It'll happen sooner. So folks, my flock, go to it, and they did. And basically the remnants of that survived. I mean, technically, 1800, 1820, whatever they say, but no, there are people that still are, basically Frankists, and they still are in power in various places. And they were they were in Europe. I mean, at one time it was like, 1/3 of the Catholics were Frankists. I mean, wow. It really had a major impact during those centuries, but the remnants remained and survived, and there are secret Frankists and Sabatinians basically still. And I think, basically there are a lot of these people that are in these governments. They have, first of all, psychopathy and pedophilia kind of go together. I mean, to rape a child, you must be a psychopath. You must not have a heart or a conscience to live with that. And you have to be. They go together. So, and there are people that engage in this secret ritual, satanic kind of practice.
Yeah, it's crazy. Another thing that came to my mind that maybe you could speak to, we still have about 20 minutes or so, a little bit more left in the show, so time to get into some deeper subjects. But one of the things that really occurred to me as I was reading the book, or about the half of the book that you've got done so far, was that I was realizing that there's so much of this as a part of, not only can pedophilia be used as a form of blackmail, but it can also be used as a form of mind control. And it clicked to me that one thing that the military and the secret societies or the fraternities have in common, and the sort of MK Ultra monarch brainwashing systems that you have, is these trauma-based mind control systems, where obviously they were using trauma in the MK Ultra experiments, but also the hazing rituals in the military and in these secret societies. So that it's like there's this way of, well, I mean, you've already touched on it a little bit with that energy of being sodomized, where you're being controlled, and the authority figure is on top of you, as it were, and controlling you. But it just continues to manifest, I think, that Luciferian psychology and that mind control, where people just participate in the hierarchy and they don't think for themselves. We started the conversation, you were talking about, not really fitting in at West Point because you didn't fit into that hierarchical structure. I know, I have the same experience with my education too. And I think that these kinds of hazing rituals, if you will, feed into that Luciferian mindset, or bring about that kind of energy that ends up kind of brainwashing you, or, is used as this mind control tool. Can you touch on that a bit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, they base their practices, their training, their brainwashing methods. Basically, it comes from the Operation Paperclip. We have Dr. Mengele from Nazi concentration camps, using the drugs and doing the research on those poor concentration camp victims. And then basically Alan Dulles, brought them over through the CIA. They were brought over to America to basically run the MK Ultra program, the Monarch program of brainwashing and mind control. So yeah, I mean, the roots go pretty deep, and they use drugs. And at 1 and 2 years old, and also the Illuminati. There's Illuminati families that have been around for centuries. Mm-hmm. And they also engage in these same practices of engaging in torture and sodomy of children at early ages of 1 and 2 years old. And basically what that does is it basically will break the personality down into various parts or personas or personalities, dissociative states, where in order to cope and survive, the human brain will split itself off, and we talk about compartmentalization, right, where one part is completely unaware of the other parts. In order to function and survive as a human being, that's what the brain will do under that kind of trauma. And so they basically have been trained since basically the early days of the early 50s when this whole MK thing came in. They've been having generation after generation of trained sex slaves, trained assassins, trained spies, and drug mules. They use them for all kinds of nefarious, horrific purposes as these slaves, basically. So that's a huge part of it right there. The CIA and military intelligence, the deep underground bases, the DUMBS, the my labs, the military labs, they've been doing this for a long, long time now. And Yeah, it's pretty out of control, and they've got. I would venture to say, and it's also not just America. They have all kinds of these programs everywhere, and the basis is, and I can see a parallel even with West Point and the brainwashing, the hazing there.
Mm-hmm.
What they do is they strip the personality down into a nothing, a feeling like you're just a worthless piece of you know what,
Right.
and then they incrementally give you quote privileges back very systematically, methodically, and so that you end up being programmed basically to in the humiliation and hazing process to buying into the system where you believe, oh, okay, I just need to be a good follower and I'll enforce all the rules and make other people look bad so I look good and then they will reward me. And this is how it's done.
Yeah.
And if you play the game and you ingratiate, and of course it goes way beyond just the military. It's in the corporate structure, it's in it's education, every kind of system, basically.
Totally.
You play the game, and that's how it's done. And obviously it's a game of psychopathy. You have to have no heart, no conscience, no guilt, and you just play the game in a very cutthroat, very tyrannical, self-serving fashion where you outshine in all that negative energy your opponents and competitors,
Right.
and you're rewarded. There it is. I mean, and of course, pedophilia is all part of that whole process when you get up to the higher level.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, this to me is describing what the word Luciferian, I guess, means to me, is this complete lack, like functioning with a lack of emotion. And I think you're right. Like I was just having that thought right when you voiced it and you vocalized it, that the same energy happens in the school systems. I mean, it's the way that you enforce any hierarchical system. You're trying to keep the people on the bottom to do what the people on the top want them to do, not think for themselves, not care about their environment, but just beat them down until they do what they're told. And it works, on every level of our lives. I mean, all of us have been, even if we haven't been sodomized, or abused sexually, all of us have been affected by this in one way or the other because it's the foundation of our culture. So how can we be surprised when the top layers of our culture are, pushing this to these extremes?
Right. Yeah, the brainwash goes deep, and no one is immune from it, basically. Yeah, you can resist it by, keeping your own mind and basically thinking critically and being able to be discriminative in your thinking, challenging authority. But if you're part of the education system in this country, that's stamped out of you. Basically, They've gotten rid of the arts, so people with imagination and creative minds, they stamp that out. They just brand you basically into becoming like a robot, part of all this brainwash. So you just simply do what you're told. And geez, the system of dumbing down. I mean, I wrote an article, over 3 years ago for Global Research, and Mikhail Chossudovsky, the editor of Global Research, reposted it just yesterday. I was happy to see. And it's called The Dumbing Down of America by Design. And they have many methods. I mean, we can go through the whole laundry list. The geoengineering, all the heavy toxic metals that were being taken into our lungs and our brains. It's dumbing us down. The fluoride in the water system is dumbing our brains down. The TV itself, it's such dribble and garbage and worthless. It's feeding us all this kind of immoral, it's just trash. And it numbs people. It desensitizes them to violence. It's all a brainwash. If you allow yourself to, get sucked up in this system, and then of course your value system is all about money, and you think that if you buy this, then you're going to be a somebody. You're a somebody and have a status, reputation. It's all just a brainwash. I mean, Wall Street advertising, it's just sex shit. I mean, it's like we got to get it past this stuff, because otherwise you're just an automaton being manipulated and used for the nefarious purposes of the elite. So, yeah, we have to get away from that and start thinking individually and critically for ourselves. And in doing that, we will gravitate, we will basically attract other like-minded individuals, and together we can collectively exercise our power of choice to basically out these people for once and for all and hold them accountable. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a systemic dumbing down process. You know, I mean, the GMOs, the foods, the processed foods. I mean, yeah, you know, I think basically a lot of people are victims of this, whether it's, and then you look at the music industry, look how overt the Satanism is in that industry. I mean, they make no bones about it. They're worshipers of Satan, and they even say it. They come out and say it. So, you know, this is the system we're living in. And, you know, they're contaminating new generations of young people into basically following Satanism, being brainwashed into this whole, you know, and it's globalized, of course, you know, I mean, through the internet and all, it's going everywhere, you know, all over the world now. So, yeah, it's time to start waking up to the reality of the ugly truth, you know. I know that pedophilia is a difficult topic for a lot of people to even think about.
Right.
But if you just look the other way and say, oh, it's too disturbing, I can't deal with it, then you're part of the problem, because passivity breeds only an increase in this criminal operation. The only way we're going to get rid of it is to out these people and hold them accountable, demand that they actually be, and that's where truth and reconciliation commissions come in. We have to get the truth from basically the lower levels need to talk about who's pulling their strings. And as we find out who the puppet masters are, then we can actually hold them accountable. So I'm optimistic, because, you know, this whole thing about Weinstein and Spacey and you know, Franken now, the senator of Minnesota, and John Conyers, the congressman in Michigan. Charlie Rose, you know, Matt Lauer. I mean, this is all fringe stuff. I mean, that isn't to say that, you know, sexually harassing women, raping women, that's a horrible thing. And I'm glad it's now being exposed. But it may also be a wag the dog to cover up the fact that these people are doing these things to our children.
Right.
You know, we don't hear that yet, you know. So, yeah, I'm optimistic that we're on a wave of the truth instead of the age of deception and doublespeak that we've been subjected to for so long. Now it's the age of exposing the truth. So, yeah.
I tell you, it's a fine line. I mean, I've been doing this show. I'm doing a lot of research into, you know, these alternative ideas and finding more and more that actually, you know, I read something like Global Research, or even, I mean, your book, which is really well sourced. I mean, people who do this kind of research, you know, we know that we're going to be nitpicked by the mainstream. So people are, you know, everything is really well sourced, not making too huge leaps in judgment. But then you go out into the mainstream and you try to explain some of this stuff to people. And it's like, that's when, to me, the brainwashing becomes so apparent. And it's amazing that, I mean, I'm kind of just having this conversation with you, and I'm realizing that, you know, the pedophilia is like the tip of the spear. It's the most horrible form of this kind of Luciferian psychology that they can inflict on a certain percentage of the population. But it really is happening to so many of us. This, like, you know, trauma-based mind control when we're born, we're circumcised, we're vaccinated, you know, then we're thrown into public school. I mean, you know, and, you know, we're told.
And then just, you know, the JFK assassination, that was a trauma for the nation of America.
Sure,
basically,
absolutely.
9/11, there's another trauma. They induce all these traumas as part of the brainwashing process.
Wow.
You know, so.
Crazy. I mean,
yeah, it's real systematic.
Yeah, right. I'm amazed. I've amazed myself again. Every once in a while, the light bulb just shines a little bit brighter, you know, and it's like, God damn, I can't believe they're pulling this off. But, why don't we talk a little bit about how systemic this is and get back into focusing on pedophilia? Because I mean, it is one of those, it's like one of those root issues. The more that we can expose this, I think the more people will wake up to the rest of it. You know what I mean? It's like such a focal issue. But one of the things you got into in the book, and I remembered this issue from back when Cynthia McKinney was in Congress, and she was talking to Donald Rumsfeld about DynCorp, which had been busted, you know, engaging in child trafficking. And I remember at the time being like, what? You know, like a legitimate corporation is engaging in, you know, child trafficking? That seems so odd. But then in the book, you go on about different examples. Blackwater, USAID, you know, going into these war zones, the U.S. goes in, causes a war in Afghanistan or Iraq or right now Libya, where the slave trade is proliferating. And then they follow up with, you know, defense contractors or USAID or other organizations. You give the example of Haiti. That was an incredible situation where we had the Clinton Foundation going in there and then suddenly children going missing. And the reporter that's following the story mysteriously gets suicided, which is so typical. So, you know, can you talk to how systemic it is that these actual defense corporations are engaging in this stuff and how worldwide it is?
And we can't forget the United Nations and the, quote, peacekeepers that go around raping and trafficking that also. They're all in it together. Yeah. I mean, that's the nature of U.S. empire. And I'll also talk about the bigger picture. It isn't just U.S. or U.S. empire. It's just part of this basically monstrous structure of power and control over everything and everywhere on the earth. We have headquarters that serve various functions of this criminal operation, this crime cabal. The U.S. empire, of course, headquartered in Washington, D.C., is just but one part. They are the henchmen that actually do carry out with our U.S. military and private contractors. You know, a lot of war has been outsourced to private contractors like Blackwater and Halliburton and DynCorp. And then the CIA and the State Department, they all play a role, in USAID and charities and all that, the UN. They're all working together, along with the mob. You know, you can't forget the mob. We have the organized crime, which is the government and all its, you know, various factions. And then we have the organized crime that, you know, is supposedly the bad guys and the government are supposedly the good guys. Well, no, they're all the same, you know. They all work together. They all mix together, you know. They all have their, you know, satanic kind of rituals together, where they actually do, you know, the sodomizing and get the you know, basically the what is it, the I forgot the chrome. I'm blanking out on the term. It's a chemical actually that they get when they're doing this torture to the children and sodomizing the child.
Wow.
Just before they kill the child. There is a chemical. And
it's like an adrenaline rush or something. Yeah.
That's what it is. Oh yeah. Okay. Now I got it. It's chrome. It's related to adrenaline. It's very similar. I'm sorry, I'm just missing it right now from my mind. Right. But anyway, it starts with chrome. Yeah, they actually, it's a chemical, and they call upon, you know, interdimensional forces that are not physical, but they are attracting into their physical mind and body these very demonic forces in these rituals, and these demonic forces feed on this kind of, you know, satanistic, you know, Aleister Crowley kind of rituals, and they feed on basically evil on this earth. They feed on them, and they're looking for a physical body and mind to actually take over and control. And when you're in a super weak state, either through drugs or you're just basically an unevolved evil person, you attract these forces. I believe they're real, and certainly the elite who engages in all these satanic practices believe that they are real.
Right, absolutely.
And they actually give them power. Well, you know, drinking the blood, eating the flesh. I mean, all this literal horrible cannibalism and murder of sacrificed children actually does, give them, it rejuvenates cells. Science is even bearing this out. There's been these blood drinkers now for a long time of children,
Mm-hmm.
and it has, a rejuvenative, basically restoring the health and rejuvenation of the cellular tissues in the human body. So older people that are practicing this evil stuff, they've been doing this for a long time. And Marina Abramovic, the queen of basically all this kind of occult activity.
Yeah,
she's a
the spirit
Satanist.
cooker.
Yeah. She's like 71 years old or something, but she looks no older than 50. And
wow, I didn't know that.
You better believe that she drinks blood to keep her, youthful. Right. So yeah, it's pretty sick stuff.
It is part of this lineage. They're seeking eternal life and the fountain of youth. And, it gets into this transhumanism and that whole thing that the elite are going for too. They want to live forever, and they're willing to do whatever it takes. If they have to drink, children's blood to do it, then they do it. Or if they have to call upon these demonic forces, then that's what they do. And they just, they're willing to push it to these, the average person feels like just outrageous limits. But I mean, I guess it's working for them. If they're doing these rituals to gain power for themselves, and they do have power. I mean, they do. Yeah. They do, over hundreds of years of engaging in this kind of behavior. Their family lineages have been able to amass trillions of dollars and working on control over the entire world. So, and it's, as you say, even if, well, go ahead.
Well, as technology has advanced, their control and their operation has just basically expanded so much. I mean, in the recent decades, we've had the scandals of the 80s to kind of get a glimpse as to how it operates. But since the 80s, it has only grown. So, I mean, every year there's more missing children. Every year there's more kids that are being sodomized and killed and sacrificed. So, it's a global operation that's only getting bigger until we finally put our foot down and start stopping it.
Uh-huh. We've got, a few minutes left in the program. Can you talk about, direct examples of where these satanic ritual abuses have gone on? You talk about like the Finders cult that was exposed in the late 80s and that Colonel Aquino at the Presidio and elsewhere. I actually looked up the Oprah Winfrey interview with that guy. You had it as one of your sources, and I was like, I can't believe he was on Oprah Winfrey. It's like right in your face.
In full Dracula regalia.
Right?
Yeah, the Army allowed this guy to have a 30-something year career, and he was a known Satanist. When he went into the Army, he was a Satanist that followed Anton LaVey. He was his right-hand man while he was a lieutenant. And he broke off in 1975 and started his Temple of Set, based on the deity from Egypt, Set, which is the deity of darkness and war and conflict and evil things, obviously. And this guy, he's been a programmer for the MK Ultra program. He's a PhD. I mean, he started out as a psyops warrior, basically psychological operations warfare, and he's a master of mind control. He is a pedophile. He was also involved in the Franklin scandal. He actually. Paul Bonacci, one of the victims of the Franklin scandal, was with him. He was basically controlling Paul Bonacci and this is what they do. They have mind-controlled kids, sex slaves, out there procuring, enticing other kids to the van. And then the adults jump out of the van and grab the child. Johnny Gosch, the kind of a famous case from the newspaper boy in Iowa that was actually kidnapped in, I think, 1983, I believe it was. And Paul Bonacci was the guy that actually, he was like, 4 14 or 15 at the time, and he said, "Hey, yeah, come on in." And then they grabbed him, and Michael Aquino was actually there. This Army officer in military intelligence was there, actually part of this kidnapping, and so of course, that was part of the same system of the Franklin scandal, where they were taking him into the White House, and the Lawrence King, the black man who was a rising star in the GOP party and sang the national anthem at the 1980 and 1984 convention. Actually, the 84 and 88 conventions, and then he got busted in 89 for embezzlement. He didn't even get busted for being a trafficker of all these kids from Nebraska's Boys Town into the White House and everywhere. They went to Bohemian Grove, so.
Right.
Hunter Thompson was part of that. He actually made snuff films, but he was also kind of about to come clean when they murdered him. He was murdered, by the way.
I saw that. I actually looked up that website too in your sources, because I was like, no way, But I looked up the website and I checked it out, and there's definitely some sketchy things going on around Hunter Thompson's, quote unquote suicide there. That was interesting.
Yeah, and that's what they do. They've killed a lot of people that have. I mean, a whole bunch of people that were outing Jimmy Savile in England, who for over 50 years was sodomizing and even dead children. He'd kill them and have sex with a dead child. And this guy was beloved in England. He ran with the royalty. He was their best buddy. And of course we have, we know that basically the Windsor family is full of Lord Mountbatten, who was the uncle of Philip, was actually a pedophile. And we think that Philip and even Charles and all of these people engaged in the practice of pedophilia, and they ran closely. They were in tight with Jimmy Savile, who the BBC for decades knew what was going on, and there were whistleblowers that came forth while he was still alive, and then they were murdered. So it was kept quiet, and that's how they operate. They actually engage in murder very often. They have assassination squads. I mean, Colonel Griggs, he's an assassin. They have these people in the military and the CIA, and so they eliminate, they neutralize people that are deemed threats to the system. Mm-hmm. So that's the world we're living in.
It's pretty crazy. I mean, it's just amazing to see that there is this seedy underbelly to what's going on in elite circles, and they use these child sex slaves. Feeding them to foreign dignitaries when they come, and making sure that they have sex slaves there at the meetings at the Bohemian Grove and at these other cabal meetings that they have. And, you start digging into it and you find out that it's all over the place, and it's being fed by the system, by these defense contractors, it's not that far underneath the surface. So we're a little over an hour, so kind of time to wrap it up. But I was just wondering what you think and what you feel. I know you've said you're optimistic right now, but what is it going to take? Because we've seen so many whistleblowers come forward. Like, I was talking to a friend of mine before this, and he was kind of like, oh, that idea is really far out. I'm sort of waiting for a whistleblower to come out and talk about it. And I said, well, there are dozens of these people. There are all, hundreds of these people that have come out and told their stories. But I think there's still an element within the culture that's in denial. Like we were talking about, like maybe we can handle Kevin Spacey, but we can't handle, the Epsteins or the Johnny Sevilles of the world just yet, to come out and really start talking about it as a culture. Do you see that as happening? I mean, maybe Pizzagate was scratching on the door there. Like maybe we're about to be able to turn this into an issue. What do you think it's going to take to really break open this can of worms and start making a change here?
Well, it would help if the Clintons were arrested and indicted, among many other high crimes. But if they were indicted also for pedophilia, that would be a real big opening, a gateway into the rest of them. Like I said, I think truth and reconciliation commissions are going to be the answer to get the ones that are pulling all the strings at the top. And we're talking about, obviously, the bloodline families that have been calling all the shots and pulling the strings, the Rothschild money and Rockefellers. They're controllers. They're planetary controllers that engage in these satanic practices. And, so to get to them, we have to get the lower levels to talk. And I believe that is happening. I think Weiner basically was making sure that he minimized his punishment by squealing. And his laptop was a treasure trove of this perversion. They got Uma Abedin, his wife, with Hillary Clinton and an underage girl on Sex Slave Island. And the New York Police Department made a copy of that. So,
I actually thought I thought that whole thing was on the verge of really opening up something big. I'm still waiting for somebody in the FBI to come clean about what was on that laptop and let the world know what they really found, because it seems like Weiner and Abedin, they got cold busted doing something, and then they went underground, and now we're not, but if that can come to the light of day, I think that could go a long way towards what you're talking about, getting the Clintons behind bars and really exposing, what's going on with a lot of these people in the elite class.
So, I know that, I think it was back in February of 2017, the word on the internet was, these big busts are going to go down. They have indictments against and we're hearing it again now with these sealed indictments from the Mueller prosecution. But that whole thing is just a farce. Everybody knows that they're all Hillary and Purple Revolution and let's oust, Trump. But that's all coming out now, So, I understand people's, and I'm saying the same. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I'll tell you, if we're talking about it and spreading the word and more people get it and critical mass is reached, it will come out. And so I have my faith that the truth will actually, prevail in spreading and more people demanding change. And, but we're waiting for the big rotten fruit at the top that are the major players, that household names. We're waiting on them, and we've been waiting. It was February that all the Feinstein was one of them. McCain, Grant, Lindsey Graham. I mean, there's like a handful that were mentioned that were actually going to get arrested. Now they're campaign managers in various places. There have been arrests of them for pedophilia. And that they're going to talk, or at least some of them will. And so I think it's just a matter of time. And I think the more we get the word out there, the more pressure can be brought to bear, so that even the mainstream media, the enablers, the complicit group that actually participates amongst them, some of the top people in media also are pedophilia guilty as well. They'll have to deal with it. Slowly but surely, as more information comes out, they will have to deal with it. It's our best shot at basically bringing the cabal down. That's why I'm writing the book. It's our best shot to protect children in the future from this horrific fate that so many millions of kids all through the years have been, unfortunately abused this way. So it's our best shot of bringing some justice to this world that's been long missing.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that, like I said earlier, that light bulb is really kind of going on for me, that the level of trauma that we're all really enduring has actually maybe manifested in this kind of denial culturally that we're in. And hopefully by talking about this stuff, and I mean, as a therapist, this is how we work through it. Like, we can talk about it, bring it to the light of day, start to expose some of the wounds and start the healing process, so that maybe, we can really expose it and bring it to the top and get people to start, get out of denial, because really the information's right in front of everybody's face. They just need to wake up and see it. So
Right.
anyway, I really want to thank you for the work that you're doing towards that end. I hope that we can keep making it happen, keep doing more interviews like this one, and we'll try to get this conversation really going. I totally agree 100% that if we can achieve that critical mass, then suddenly there's not going to be any denying it anymore. We're going to have to start talking about it, and maybe it can go from the Kevin Spaceys and the Charlie Roses to the Jimmy Savilles and the Hillary Clintons or the Bill Clintons of the world, and the Epsteins, Jeffrey Epsteins of the world, that are really doing this on that higher level. So.
Let's not wait for them to die for all the truth to come out.
Right.
Travel. So yeah, and in the closing minute, let me do a self plug here.
Yeah, go for it. Let everybody know where they can find out more.
Yeah, I have a blog site, empireexposed.blogspot.com, and that's where you can find all my chapters, all my material, all my articles. I've written hundreds of articles for various alternative news sites, and you can find all that material there. You can also find the book chapters that are completed, as well as a chapter outline, at a link called tinyurl.com/pedo-empire, PEDO empire. And then I have an Indiegogo campaign to help raise money so that we can get the word out and help children. And that is at tinyurl.pedo-empire-donate. I also have my chapters online. They're for free at my blog site and the Pedo Empire link. But also, you can buy the chapters for 99 cents, reasonable price, on Amazon Kindle. And they're all top 10. They're doing very well.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So that also gives me some optimism that the word is getting out there. There are people that are learning and spreading the word. So that's good. And we're in the holiday season now. So, if you want to bury basically the deep state and all the elite pedophiles, there's no better way than to give the gift of my book. And that book title is Pedophilia and Empire, Satan, Sodomy, and the Deep State. So, take a look at it, spread the word, and we're in it together, and we're going to make a difference to start bringing justice for the children, basically. Save the children and put the perpetrators behind bars, isolate them so they can't hurt any more people.
Well, that's excellent. Joachim, thank you so much again for your work, and I'll make sure and get all that information in the show notes so people can find out where they can go to donate. And I just want to take a second here at the end of the show to remind people that if they like what they're hearing, they can help me out by becoming a patron. That's patreon.com/The Shift. If you want to find more information, please go to Facebook at The Shift with Doug McKenty. We're on Twitter at DMcKenty, and my website is www.theshiftnow.com for archives of my other episodes and other information about what's going on here at The Shift. Thank you so much for being on the show, Joachim Hagopian, ladies and gentlemen. What great work on about the pedophile situation that's going on in the world. And I really thank you again for just helping to wake people up. I think it's a pivotal issue. And I think the more people that get educated about this, the faster we can see some really positive change in our world.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Doug.
You bet, Joachim. Thank you. And have a good day. Take care.